systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy, GS Luke, with our round 2 showdown stream for the Travelers Championship. Going to get you guys ready to build all of your lineups for Friday. We'll talk through a weather report, some of the strategy for tomorrow's action, as well as how to build your player pool, looking at the shots gained metrics, and we'll wrap it up with a little bit of strategy and building a lineup or two together on DraftKings too. And any sort of questions or player deep dives that you want to fill in the gaps with, feel free to go ahead and let me know in the live chat. And even if you don't have any questions to pick my brain with, don't feel shy to go ahead and say hi down there either. We got Alan, Steven in the chat, Joshua, Nick, shout out to all of you. Go Collect with the Luke chat as per usual. Welcome on in, buddy. We got, who else? Justin, Ross, Noah, a lot of chats. A couple Joshes down there and Ed as well. Let's have ourselves a fantastic Friday. So any sort of questions, I'll get to those a little bit later on. But we're going to start it off with some of the specifics and course details before we deep dive any plays. So it started off with the golf course today, which, as expected, played a lot easier in the morning. And that was due to the absence of wind. They had less than 5-6 miles an hour of wind for the first 4 hours, which I told you guys, if you're playing some round 1 showdown lineups, you better have stacked those first half of tee times, because even though there wasn't a quote unquote AM or a PM wave, if you break it down versus the first versus the second half, it was a 1.7 shot difference. So I did have a few lineups that skewed towards the AM wave, which we'll see how that ends up shaking out after 2 rounds. But for round 1 showdown specifically, I thought it was worth exploring. And when we take a look at this round 2 forecast, and it looks pretty consistent throughout the day, that could have been the side to stack for a week long as well. So tomorrow's forecast looks a lot more consistent than what we had for Thursday. The first tee time's about 8 a.m. local, and right about 8 a.m. local, they have it at 13 miles an hour sustained, which is in that 13 to 15 mile an hour range the entire day. And your wind gusts are in the 25 to 30 mile an hour range for the entire day as well. So unlike today, where you had a pretty drastic impact about noon when those winds came through, it's not going to be the same kind of slate for round number 2. So from the weather angle, I'm not playing a massive lean in either direction. I would say that there's a chance that the AM guys get slightly easier conditions, just with the fact that the golf course could get firmer and faster with all that wind and at least a little bit of sun in the forecast for Friday. But that kind of edge would be like 0.2 shots most likely between the AM and the PM wave, which is just the first versus the second half on a week like this, but nothing like the 1.7 shot difference today. So that's why I mentioned it for the main slate, there potentially being that kind of an edge there. But without a cut line after 36 holes, that effect is minimized on a week like this. And that's why I didn't fully play it for any of my main slate lineups. So even if you do have some guys that kind of got kicked in the nuts this afternoon, it is still a 4-round event. So I wouldn't be that down in the dumps about that sort of thing. It definitely played harder than what you had in the morning wave as well. So that's the weather aspect. Any sort of questions, I'm going to have you guys go back to this section of the live stream to go ahead and check that out. Before we start talking through the player pool, going through some player deep dives and all that kind of fun stuff, let's talk about ownership, which on a slate without a big weather edge, we have really 2 things that we can lean into. And that would be building a solid player pool, which we're going to spend a good amount of time here together talking through the kind of metrics to look for in your player pool, but also the game theory edge. And rounds 2 and 3 showdown are the best spots to get a game theory edge, because we don't have placement points in play whatsoever for round 2 and 3 showdown. Unlike main slate, unlike round 4 showdown, where the placement points do come back into play, rounds 2 and 3 are a completely blank slate, unlike those other kind of scenarios. And the ownership, a lot of your casual players that are playing in showdown play without that kind of knowledge. Some of them expect placement to be in play, and even if they're not, giving them placement points like some people make the mistake of doing, a lot of times they make the mistake of thinking that the guys at the top end of the board, they're in the top 5, top 10 after round number 1, are always going to be the nuts for the next day. They think that form is just a guarantor of success from one round to another. And if you've been playing or watching golf for any sort of stretch of time, you'd know that that is not the case for these players. So the edge for round 2 and 3 showdown is primarily playing against the rest of the field and knowing that you can fade the top end of the board in those inflated ownership plays, but then also building a really good player pool. So before we talk through the player pool aspect, I just want to go through some of the higher owned plays that we have for round 2. So these are coming from my projections, which are on my Patreon page. I do have to keep the exact numbers behind the paywall for all my paying members over there, but to give you guys an idea for some of the higher owned players that we're going to have for Friday's slate. In terms of your 10K plus players, the highest owned guy is Scotty Scheffler. We're not going to talk exact numbers, but I'm going to give you the highest owned player in each price range. 9K range, believe it or not, is Keegan Bradley, and he's at $9,000. So like he's the lowest end player in that range, and he's still the highest owned guy with a 9 at the start of his price tag. Next up in the 8K range, highest owned player is a Cam Young, who's also really chalky compared to some of the other guys around him. 7K range, it looks like it's Sungjae Im, who's the highest owned player that we have in the 7K range. And then in the 6K range, let's see, I think it's going to be Wyndham Clark. Yeah, Wyndham Clark, a little bit over 10% projected owned in my projections. Of those players that I just pointed out, it's not like you have to fade every single one of those guys. But if you don't absolutely love them with the metrics that we're about to go through, there's a really good argument to be made to fade a lot of those players towards the top because this is an extremely variant sport. It is one of the hardest to predict sports that we play DFS for. It's not like NBA DFS that's a little bit more predictable, or even NFL DFS to some extent that is a little bit more figured out than what we have here for golf. Even the world's best players tend to struggle at times. So, taking that game theory approach and fading the guys that are going to be double, 3 times the ownership of the other players around them is usually a pretty good idea. So, of course, if you're a member of the SHIPIT Nation, we're going to have projections posted for you guys a little bit later on tonight. But if you guys want your projections now, I actually already have those up on my Patreon page. So if you're a member of my Patreon page already, you guys can go ahead and follow along with the spreadsheet, give you guys an idea of the ownership when we talk through specific plays on here, because we can talk about the metrics. We can talk about how somebody sets up going from one round to another all we want, and we're going to do that for the next 10 minutes or so here. But ownership is the driving component of that too, right? If they're super high owned and they're a good play, then that kind of takes away from that, right? They're not really the best play if they're super chalky, even if they check a lot of those boxes. But let's say that they're like a 7 out of 10 when it comes to the stat profile, which a lot of times, right, we rate players out of 10 when we look at their stat profile. That's how I like to handle evaluating these guys on a live stream like this. Let's say that they're like a 7.5 out of 10 on the stat profile that we go through here, but they're average to below average ownership when we look at projections on my site or the SHIPIT Nation site later on. Then that makes them a great play compared to somebody that might be maybe slightly better from the stat perspective, but is super chalky in that range. So that's why having ownership projections that you can rely on for round 2 showdown is so important, and why I wanted to mention that right off the bat. Before we talk about any specific player deep dives that you guys had for me, and I saw already a lot of those in chat, so we're going to go through this rather quickly so that we have time to go through all those. Let's go through the shots gained ball striking. And if you haven't already been here for a showdown stream, I'm going to give you guys the Spark Notes version of what we're looking for in players. The idea with my golf handicapping process, and frankly, most of the industry follows this same sort of idea from round to round, is that a player's golf swing, their off the tee play and approach play, how they're actually hitting the golf ball is the most consistent part of golf from round to round. You'll hear players talk about that. If you've played golf yourself, you can probably attest to that same sort of thing. But shots gained off the tee, shots gained approach, we want to see players that are deeply into the green in these 2 categories. The around the green and the putting, that constitutes shots gained short game. When you combine shots gained around the green plus shots gained putting, it's not terrible to see guys that are dark green in those 2 categories. It's just that it doesn't mean as much as these left 2, this off the tee plus approach here, because it's a lot more variant than what we have with these ball striking categories. So when I'm trying to find guys that played well today that I might be able to find at sneaky low ownership for the next day, I usually start with these shots gained ball striking stats. And, if we're looking for sneakier players, we don't want to look at the very top end of this list, because guys like a Nick Taylor, for example, Wyndham Clark, Scotty Scheffler, Scheffler, Cam Young, Tommy Fleetwood, that all shot -4 or better, are those guys at the top end of the leaderboard that are getting all that extra steam. And while it wouldn't surprise me at all if like one of those guys went out there and had themselves a day, 2 days in a row and was your 36-hole leader, the guys that I'm really talking about for Showdown that I think are a lot more interesting, especially at lower ownership numbers, might be a Ben Griffin, who is still going to be average, maybe slightly above average ownership, but he's not going to be one of the chalkiest players that we have on the entire slate. And his shots gained profile, as you can see, he's gaining just under 3 shots gained to ball striking, but he lost a stroke on the greens. So even though he had 5 birdies on the round, it probably could have been a whole lot more than that if he had anything dropping with the shots gained putting. So Kevin Yu, who's T26, he's not going to get nearly as much steam as the guys T7 or better. Victor Hovland and Adam Hadwin will be a little bit chalky compared to their peers at that portion of the pricing. But a Lucas Glover, a Sam Burns, for example, a Steven Yeager at T26, a Max Homa at T26 as well. Those are the kind of like diamonds in the rough that I'm personally looking to, that were ball striking heavy today and that weren't carrying themselves in the 2 short game categories. So that's the shots gained to ball striking. And it's not an end all be all. Like I said, I kind of avoid these top tier players because of all the kind of steam that they're getting. And I'll say that of those top 5, there is one of those kind of 5 that I am playing in my player pool. But the other ones, because they're so highly owned, and that game theory edge is one of the biggest, sources of variant of ROI that we can find on a round 2 showdown slate, I'm going to lean into it as much as humanly possible and fade a lot of those guys as well. And then with the short game, something else I like to look for and kind of just consider for round 2 are that the guys that gained a whole bunch of strokes with their putting and around the green are going to have a really hard time doing that in back-to-back rounds. So Taylor Pendrith, Eckroat, Im, McIlroy, Keegan Bradley, Scotty Scheffler, that all gained over 2.5 strokes of the putter, all going to be really hard for me to want to play unless their ball striking was there as well. So like with a Scotty, maybe it's not as big a deal because he also gained a crap ton of strokes with his tee to green play. But somebody like a Pendrith that lost 2 strokes off the tee, it was a lot sketchier, wasn't as great with the shots gained approach. Like maybe that's a little bit of a sign of worry. A Sungjae Im who lost almost 2 strokes approach, but gained over 3.5 strokes putting, like that's a little bit of a red flag there too. And Christian Bezainhout, he gained over 2 strokes putting, but he lost 4 strokes ball striking in round number 1. Those are the kind of players that I'm probably going to be avoiding in most cases. And in fact, of those guys I just pointed out, I think I'm avoiding all but one of those players. That's one of the guys that had a really good putting day. And there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. After we go through the shots gained metrics here in just a second, I'm going to talk about a few of the other reasons, a few of the other things I'm looking for in players that'll get me onto them for round 2, because it's not just the shots gained metrics. That is just one part of the puzzle when it comes to building a player pool. But these putting guys are around the green players that gained a whole bunch of strokes. You got to hold it against them just a little bit because it's very hard to repeat that in back-to-back days. On the flip side, though, guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes in these 2 categories, you can give a little bit of slack to. So Siwoo Kim, for example, who lost about 4 strokes putting, it feels like he could have a bounce-back day there. Johnny Vegas, he gained off the tee. It wasn't the best on approach, but he lost about 5 strokes in the short game categories. That feels like something that's not going to happen every single day. JJ Spawn maybe due for some short game regression. And you can see that I'm not talking about like a Sam Stevens as much in this category, or, a Sepp Straka as much, or these guys that lost strokes in the ball striking because of the fact that, you don't just want to play guys that lost strokes in the short game categories, right? That's not the good aspect. You want to find guys that were good ball striking, but that lost their entire round, lost their hat when it came to their short game stats, and that's why they had the bad day. That's what I'm looking for in a short game regression candidate. So if you look at the around the green players, you can see a lot of the same stuff. So like Poston is another great example of one of these players where he gained with the approach play, did lose off the tee. That's he'll want to clean that up if we're going to have a spike round. But him losing over 4 strokes in the short game categories is hardly ever going to happen for JT Poston. So like, even if he's just a neutral in that category, he has about a field average day, which is a huge, huge improvement over his +3 from today. But you can find those kind of players, those kind of like diamonds in the rough with the shots gained metrics, and try and find some of your plays for tomorrow. But on top of just looking at the round one stats, because we only have an 18-hole sample size to look at, which is tiny, that's why this is only part of your process for round two showdown, ideally. I also look at course history players, so guys that have played well around TPC River Highlands. This is a golf course that we've seen for a very long time. So there are guys in this field that have 10 plus years of course history, players that routinely are finishing top 10, top 20, maybe worth a few extra looks for showdown, especially if they didn't play well today. And they're going to be guys that, like, no matter what, they played so poorly today, shot over par, for example, their shots gained metrics aren't going to look great. The course history is how you can get to some of those kind of players. And, not to give away my entire player pool, because like my projections, I do have to keep those for my members that support the content I do, support the channel, everything like that. And I got to make sure the plays are valuable to those sort of people. But like, I'll tell you that a Tony Finau, he's had some sneaky good finishes around a TPC River Highlands. He had a terrible day today. Like, I'm using him in my showdown lineups for tomorrow because of that course history. That's, a good enough reason for me to take a bounce back spot. So it's not just the shots gained metrics that should be the end all be all. Something else that I incorporate, and you've probably heard this if you've watched these live streams before, but are high upside players, guys that make a whole lot of birdies, because DraftKings scoring is, after all, for round two showdown is completely correlated to the amount of birdies that you're making. And just to go ahead and show you guys what I'm talking about, there's no placement points here. We mentioned that earlier, but it's all about the amount of birdies, right? 5.75 points per birdie. Sure, you lose points for bogeys. You get a few points for a par, that kind of thing. But when you're trying to get to a 50-plus point score, an eagle would be really nice. Those 11 points to get to that kind of thing. But it's mostly driven by your birdie production. So guys that can make 6 to 8 birdies are going to be the players that you're going to want to have in a lot of those lineups. That's what I'm focusing on as well. So a good way to look at that would be to go to PGATour.com, click on stats, go to scoring, and then scroll down to birdie or better percentage. And I know it sounds pretty simplistic, but just take some of the guys, especially if they're low owned, a little bit of a bounce back spot. Round two is a good spot to take a bounce back player, especially one that makes a whole lot of birdies, and just rely on that for some of your analysis. So those are 4 of the pillars that I use to find my plays: ball striking poppers, short game regression candidates, course history players, and those high upside options. And if you're on the Patreon page and you guys were looking at my player pool, I actually put down like the reasoning for getting to every single player I'm getting to. It's one of those 4 things for every single player. There's no one in there that's in there for like any just random reason. There's a calculated reasoning for getting to every single player that I'm using. And that's as a 150 max player. This isn't somebody that's just sitting on the toilet entering 6 players and going like, okay, I can think of a reason for getting to those 6. I know ahead of time, before I'm even selecting players, why I'm on them. I think a lot of you guys out there can learn from that sort of process and incorporate it yourself. You should always know why you're playing somebody, whether it's low ownership, you're taking them at high ownership because they're a really good course fit, et cetera, et cetera. There shouldn't be really anyone in your lineup you're like, oh, I'm just throwing them in there for the hell of it. You've got enough players, 71 after the Jordan Spieth withdrawal, that you're going to have enough guys to choose from where you shouldn't just be picking out of a hat. So that's always my advice for these showdown slates, is that have a process to get onto a player pool, and it can adjust a little bit from slate to slate. Sometimes I incorporate the placement points like we have for Sunday. Sometimes I'll look at wind players, guys that hit the ball a little bit lower when they were playing in windier conditions. It's not quite nasty enough for me to start playing wind guys in round number 2, but it's going to be breezy the entire day, and you can't really avoid that aspect. Maybe that's something that you incorporate yourself for your round 2 process. So I always like to spitball, kind of give you guys ideas of what to play for yourself. You can always look at round 2 historical. That's something that we'll have on the SHIPIT Nation Stone. You can also play guys that are good on bent POA putting surfaces. That's the type of grass that we have at this kind of event. All of those things, valid reasonings for getting onto players. Just have that reasoning. And, you could even make one of your reasonings that I'm playing somebody because they're low owned. Just have that thought out, right? Have that roadmap, that mental map made in your head of exactly why you're making all of those decisions. And afterwards, the beauty of doing that, by the way, and the beauty of doing it the way that I have it set, at least for being able to kind of go back and kind of learn from it afterwards, is I can see why I was on players and I can see where things went right and where things went wrong. So if you're somebody that has your own process for yourself, I would challenge you guys to start writing down not only who you're playing ahead of time so that you have your player pool, but also why you're on all of those plays, because it's going to give you a really good chance to do some recapping afterwards to, dive into what went right, what went wrong, and improve that process even more than what it was before. So we're going to go through some player deep dives now. I wanted to give you guys some time to throw those into chat. We'll give you guys the shots gained metrics, how they set up heading into round number 2. And then after we go through those, we're going to round it off with a little bit of strategy as well. So let me get a sip of water. Let me find our spot with the questions, and then let's get these things cranking out here with these breakdowns. Let's see. So a lot of people had Jordan Spieth too, it looks like. Yeah, he's my guy. Hopefully he can get that health going. It's unfortunate to see that happen to him. Nick says, what are we doing after locking Scotty? Oh boy. So yeah, you're playing 100% Scotty tomorrow. I guess I couldn't argue against it with how he looked today, but he's going to be super highly owned. So that's for damn sure. So I'd say, Nick, if you're going to be locking Scotty Scheffler, figure out where you're going to get different after playing Scotty Scheffler, because that is going to be something that you want to think about in those kind of lineups. You're saying, are you going to lock Siwoo? He could have a nice bounce back round. I wouldn't go as far as locking him, but those 4 shots gained lost with the putter, you'd have to think you're going to come bouncing back. Now, he's a struggle. He struggles with the putter, but he is going to have 3 whole rounds to figure it out. I'd say over the next 3 days, he has a spike performance, and you're going to want to be there when that happens, because he'll probably shoot a super low score if he can make some putts. How bad was Decky today? Yeah, he didn't have his best stuff, huh? Didn't have his fastball, as some would say. He wasn't that terrible, though, with his T36. He gained off the tee, lost on approach, gained around the green, and then lost with the putter. So a little bit of Jekyll and Hyde, was all over the place. 5 out of 10 stat profile. He actually wasn't that terrible. And I will say the ownership on Hideki Matsuyama is pretty much non-existent, at least in my projections. I believe I had him about 10%, which was markedly lower owned than a lot of the other guys around him. You're looking at Vegas for a bounce back too. And yeah, looks like you're looking for the short game regression candidates, because Vegas fits that same sort of mold. I'm okay with that, especially because the ball striking on those two was close to neutral, even into the positive on some of the categories. I could see it. Straka for a bounce back. So the shots gained metrics are terrible on Straka, but this does not condemn a player that is top 5 in the PGA Tour and birdie or better percentage. So for example, I'm playing Straka for a bounce back, especially with how good of a course fit he is around TPC River Highlands, when he makes so many birdies compared to his peers. So yeah, stat profile here though, just to point that out, he did lose in every category, but around the green is about as bad as it could possibly get. So, these are the kind of guys that I'm using at lower ownership towards the top as bounce back candidates. So yeah, I'm using them. I don't think it's out of reason. Just know what you're getting yourself into. The form is not the best for sure. Yeah, Ross says that Shane's being a little bit of a turd. I can't disagree with you on that one either. Hopefully he gets it into gear at some point. Do I think that Clanton could win? I think he'll win a tour event at some point. It would kind of surprise me if it was a big one like this, though. Probably going to be something that's more of like your run-of-the-mill PGA Tour event before he starts winning at a signature event. But who knows? I mean, he is somebody I think is top 5, top 10 in the world sort of potential someday. So I wouldn't throw it past him. You got about 150 to 1. That's a heck of a number you got right there. And yeah, wearing the Jason Day swag. I don't know if I have him in my poll for tomorrow, but maybe I should, right? It's a little homage to my guy. What's going on, Deacon? Doing well myself, hopefully. It's the same for you. And he said, good to see as usual and hoping that we can get this showdown. No cut is kind of weird, but let's get it for tomorrow, man. Let's see. Yob, you're cracking me up. I'm not going to put the comment in screen, but you do make me laugh. Josh was taken back by that one as well. Do I know why he withdrew? I do. He had a back issue going on. He was trying to battle through it for quite some time. So, yeah, that's why he withdrew. Hopefully he's okay. And I'm surprised he didn't withdraw before he did, because he was really struggling out there. If I don't mind, let's go through Poston, Fowler, and Griffin on a scale from 1 to 10. I never mind Goku, so don't ever feel like you have to hold back any sort of questions. So let's go with Poston first. He was one of the short game guys that lost a whole bunch of strokes. In fact, over 4 strokes there. So he's got a bounce back in him for sure. The other 2 were a Fowler and then a Griffin. So Griffin, I'm assuming, is Ben Griffin. We'll start there because I already know what to say. Ball striking, fantastic. Lost to stroke putting. I think that he'll get some ownership because of his price tag and the fact that the shots gained metrics look good on him, right? We're not going to be the only ones that see that when you're doing this kind of a deep dive, but I'd have to say like 7.5 out of 10 stat profile. Poston, his stat profile is like a 4 out of 10, but he does have that short game regression kind of stat profile going for him. And then you said Ricky, right? Let me double check that just to make sure I'm looking at the right player. Yeah, we were looking at Ricky Fowler too. So Ricky gained off the tee, gained with the approach play, then lost 2 strokes putting. That's like a 6.5, maybe even a 7 out of 10 stat profile. Maybe a 6.5 out of 10 is a little bit more appropriate just because the ball striking wasn't a strength of his per se. 0.8 strokes between the 2 categories isn't that much. It's not really anything to write home about. And that's why he shot even par and only ended up at T43. So yeah, like a 6.5 out of 10 stat profile there. But even if he's a neutral with the putter, that's about a field average day, maybe even a slightly better than field average day, let alone with the upside for him to gain 2-3 strokes putting and then completely flip the round on its head. So yeah, I like a lot of those players that you just pointed out, and especially Ben Griffin, man. Ben Griffin's going to be a part of a lot of my exposure tomorrow. How am I feeling about Adam Hadwin? So Adam Sadwin, as I sometimes coin him, was not very sad on the golf course today because he gained a whole bunch of strokes ball striking. So over a stroke off the tee and with the approach play, did gain into 2 short game categories. So stat profile wise, it's very, very solid. You can't really nitpick it whatsoever. There's no shots gained category where he was losing strokes to the field, but it's Adam Hadwin. So sometimes we got to remind ourselves who we're dealing with. I will say I am playing Adam Hadwin for tomorrow, so I hope that he does not remember who he is. I hope he continues to play like an absolute god, but I have a sneaking suspicion that he's going to come crashing back down. But I'm okay with guys coming crashing back down. I'm okay with 6K guys flopping at times because that's what you're signing up for when you're playing somebody at the very bottom of the pricing. But yeah, stat profile is pretty sweet. I just kind of hope that he continues to be unconscious and forget who he is for a little bit. Neck and back, yeah, that's what it was for sure. Rip him. You said one thing you notice is that they have zero care for bettors as they're willing to at least tee off before withdrawing. Yeah, they don't care about us bettors, but they care about their health a little bit more. I can't really blame them. Imagine not even having a 6-6 and a single entry and a no cut. Yeah, so you're Jordan Spieth truther, huh? Johnny Vegas is the pure definition of or he could tomorrow, Luke. And I 100% agree with that, especially with the short game being the main problem for him. And in a no-cut event, these guys know that they're going to get another 3 rounds. So they're not going to be as willing to bitch quit as we sometimes see players do. Like sometimes there's guys that are +8. They have no chance of making the cut. And you just know that they're going to mail it in, that they're just going to hit the ball around. Maybe they'll try and make a bunch of birdies, but they're going to be playing without any sort of care at all. That's not the case on a week like this. So I kind of like guys that are already good for that reason. Oh, no. Please tell me I wasn't muted for a while. Oh, geez, Louise. I have a feeling that was for a while too, huh? My bad, guys. Let me know whenever that went out. And look at you guys saying that you wish you were a professional lip syncer. Yeah, I probably wish you were too. And yeah, I just realized it was muted. I was coughing, so I clicked it and then didn't click it back. Okay. I guess we'll go back to some of these questions because that was probably mighty fine annoying, huh? Let me know, I guess, when it went out. Let me see if I can find something. It was the Riley question, the wind question. Oh, so it wasn't that far back. Thank goodness. I thought we were like way further back than that. So that mute actually wasn't when I was coughing. So that's kind of strange that that happened. So you're saying this one right here, right? At least I think that's the one that you're talking about. Not the greatest course fit. I would say that he's like a 2.5, a 3 out of 10 with the course fit, but he did win at the Charles Schwab Challenge. So I would raise the course fit just slightly because of that, because that's a more positional golf course. So like a 4 out of 10 with the course fit. Ideally, you'd want him at a course that's a little bit more wide open. But yeah, Charles Schwab Challenge and winning there kind of shedded that for me because I didn't think he'd play well around there. Then he obviously got the job done. Let's see. I'm so sorry about that, guys. It's my apologies with that. And it wasn't your volume, by the way. It was the live chat. So it was me. And it was the wind question. So let me find that exact one. So it was this one, right? So Joshua gave you a few that I thought made sense. But the ones that I was kind of mentioning in the live chat before, Xander played well at Royal Troon. He's a pretty good wind player that you could use in some lineups. And I'll just go through the list again so I can kind of remind myself of a few that I was pointing out. The point I was getting to there, though, are guys like Fleetwood Lowry are always going to get extra steam on windy days because they're like the guys that are like no-brainers that you play in windy conditions. But like JT, I've seen shoot -8. In super windy conditions before. Let's see. Let's find a few other ones on here. So like a Daniel Berger is a good grinder. Like you've seen him play well down in South Florida before. Brian Harmon, I know he's like 4 feet tall. Like he doesn't get buffeted around as much, right? He's a pretty good wind player that you can use as a grinder. A Jason Day in his Malbon fits. He's a player that also tends to play well when conditions get a little bit windier. Those are the kind of guys that I'd slightly prefer over like those European players, just because they're not going to be as popular and the ones that come to the top of people's minds when they're trying to play grinders on a more difficult day. So hopefully that answers the question, and and we're not going to be muted anymore because that was my bad, of course. So the Rory deep dive, let's do that. So that was one of the questions that was probably muted there too. So he did gain across the 4 categories, but he did most of his damage with the shots gained putting. So that free shots gained into the positive there was unsustainable, at least over 4 rounds. But if he can be more ball striking heavy, he could still get there with a slightly positive round with the putter. It's just that this stat profile we'd probably have to say is like a 5 out of 10. I don't know if we can give him that much credit for only gaining like 1.8 strokes ball striking. So it's like a 5.5 out of 10 on the stat profile. Just a little bit too short game dependent for my liking there. And of course, I was saying, of course, by the way, to Ket before when I was muted. And do I think that Siwoo can keep up the putting? I would say that he's probably not going to lose 4 strokes very many rounds on tour. Does that mean that he's going to gain like 3-4 strokes tomorrow? Not necessarily. He's not the best putter that we have out here, but he is somebody that hit the ball decently. Even if he's just a neutral tomorrow, that would be a massive improvement. Somebody that I have some high hopes for, of course. And let's have a week. Amen to that, my man. How many pivots would we take in a 100 to a 200 person contest? That would be 1 to 2, I would say. So that's more of like the single entry size of contest. I would go with 1 to 2 pivots on that. Got to get through all the muted comments now. There were a lot of you guys letting me know, which was great. There was no way I was going to miss that. Let's see. I'm looking for any questions. Isn't Keegan a low ball hitter? No, he's not. He's somebody that hits the ball pretty high. So I wouldn't say that he's a low ball hitter. Maybe off the tee, he hits it slightly lower than some players. But into the greens, he launches the ball relatively high. Glover, a good wind player? Yeah, he's somewhat known for that. I don't know if I'd say that he's like a bad wind player, but I wouldn't say that he's one of the best that like comes to mind when I think of that. The thing that I think makes Glover good in the wind is that he's a ball striker. And a lot of times your guys that gain a bunch off the tee and on approach have the best days in the wind. So that's just kind of how it works out, because if you have shoddy ball striking, any sort of spin on your golf ball, if you're marginal whatsoever, that wind takes marginal shots and it moves it off of the green. Whereas if you're like hitting the ball on point somewhat close to your target and the wind moves the ball like 3-4 yards offline, you're still on the green and still putting for birdie at that point. So I would say that he's an okay wind player, probably like a 6.5 out of 10 if I was grading that out, but I wouldn't say that he's great. Sibu, historically a bad putter there. Okay, it's a good data point to know. Probably not 4 shots gained lost per round bad, though, I'd imagine. Hit the like button, guys. It's lacking. You heard the guy. Get to it. I'm not a big like run truther. I don't always like beg the chat to go out there and do so, but it is nice to do for the Ship It Nation crew, get this content out there to even more people. If you guys found it helpful and you think that other people would benefit from finding it too, go ahead, smash it if you guys haven't already. If you didn't know, the closed captions does not work when muted. You didn't know, but you do now. Dude, that's crazy that you tried that. Yeah, dude, it's not going to work. It does work off of the audio, but if they could lip sync, that'd be pretty impressive too. Can we deep dive Collie? We sure can. I think he's a pretty good play for tomorrow because he wasn't making anything on the greens. He lost 2 strokes putting and was about neutral, maybe slightly into the positive in the other 3 categories. This is a 6 out of 10 stat profile. It's kind of similar to what we had. There was, I forget the exact player off the top of my head, but it was the same kind of stat profile where they were about a neutral, then they lost 2 strokes putting. Like, it's not going to immediately grab your eyes. Like, Collie at T43 is not going to be chalky for a round 2 showdown, but his stat profile is one of the better ones that we've seen on this entire show. But because it's not as sexy as standing out like 2 shots gained, 3 shots gained ball striking like you have with some of those top tier players, he's not going to get that kind of steam. So I think he's a fantastic play. Do I feel like Ann is a potentially good play with his metrics? So I was looking at him before, and I have to say I agree with you. I do think that he's a pretty decent play. The 1.5 shots gained approach, he did lose strokes in the 2 short game categories. It's a 6 out of 5, 6.5, maybe 7 out of 10 stat profile. It's another really good one, I'd say. So yeah, I agree with you. Min move for the bounce back. Yeah, he'll be super low owned. If you're looking for somebody at sub 5%, you're going to get that on Minwoo Lee. And then you missed it, round 2, Ricky. So yeah, we went through a little bit of a deep dive before. Actually, I think he was the guy, by the way, who had the about a neutral stat profile. In fact, he was. You can see in these 3 categories, then lost the 2 strokes putting. Thanks for the reminder. He's the exact player that fit that kind of stat profile. So that's another player to throw onto the list that, like Collie, maybe he's not like the top 5, top 10 play that you have in your projections, but he's going to be super low owned compared to a lot of the other guys up there. And then, yeah, there's the Ricky take. And then Jaeger is a lot of the same. He just couldn't buy a putt today. His ball striking, I had his over on birdies. I had his under on strokes. He did hit the under on strokes at least. He did push the birdie or better one that I took, but he gained off the tee, gained on approach, and then he lost a stroke with the putter. And that 1 stroke lost with the putter, it felt a whole lot worse than just 1 stroke because he had multiple putts within 10 feet that he missed for birdie. And at least off the top of my head, it was at least 4 that he had in the 7 to 10 foot range that he was unable to convert on. If he makes even 2 of those, that's a -4 round instead of this -2. He's posting 6 birdies or better, which is close to paying off that kind of price tag on a showdown slate. I like Steven Jaeger quite a bit. He is going to have to find some magic with the putter to pay it off, but that is well within his range of outcomes. He said Clan seems to have a low ball flight. He does off the tee, but he doesn't into greens. So it's kind of like the Keegan Bradley one where off the tee might have the low ball flight, but maybe not so much with his irons. Clanton, I've seen the guy launch those irons into the sky before. And that's just from personal experience. I've played golf with him quite a bit, and that's a part of his game that I've noticed. Is he going out alone? He sure is. He said, it feels like Ben Griffin is a must play. I always shy away from using words like must play and that kind of thing, but the stat profile is, at least of what we've seen so far, is my absolute favorite heading into tomorrow's round. All right, let's talk through some strategy. So on DraftKings, when choosing contests to enter, I think it's a really good idea to know what kind of contest you're getting into, because we have a lot of different size of contests for round number 2. And based on the size of that contest, your strategy for putting together a lineup is going to change quite a bit. So for example, one of the bigger contests that you can enter is this 150 max contest that we're looking at. This is a 95 entry contest. It's a $40,000 of total prizes, which is one of the bigger contests that you have on the slate. I believe the sand trap might be slightly bigger. In fact, let's just take a look at that. So a sand trap is 150K. It is actually a little bit smaller than that Drive the Green that we just went through. But these 7,000 to 10,000 entry contests, you're going to have to get really different to the rest of the field to get the leverage that you need to take it down. Because, if you're entering against 100 to 200 people, we had that question before where I said maybe you need 1 to 2 pivots to offset that chalk and to get the leverage that you're hoping for. In these lineups, it's 3, maybe even 4 pieces of leverage that you're mixing in. And by leverage, I don't mean all guys that are like sub 5%. They could be average to slightly below averagely owned plays that you're mixing in. But because we don't have placement points in play, and because round 2 and 3 showdown is where you want to be mixing in as much game theory as you possibly can, I say 3 and 4 pivots in these sort of contests are really what you want to go out there and play. And if you are entering this $25 or the $5 GPP, you should be 150 maxing it if you can. The reason why I say if you can is that it is a lot of money to 150 max those kind of contests. So the vast majority of you guys out there probably shouldn't be 150 maxing those contests every single slate. Rather, where a lot of people watching content like this, maybe a lot of people in the live chat should be focusing, would be on single entries like we have here. I'm going to remember to unmute my mic this time so you guys aren't sitting there in silence. But this contest, you don't have people that can enter 150 lineups against you. And then rather than beating 7,000 or 10,000 entries, you only have 277 that you have to play against. So you don't have to get as different with your lineup construction. That's not to say that in these lineups that you have to play chalk, that you have to play 3 or 4 pieces that are high owned. It's just that in your process, if you have some guys that you like that are a little bit more steamed up, you can play them in these smaller contests. And the other part of it too is that they're not as top heavy. This one is a 5th to first place, which for single entry is actually a little bit more top heavy than what we're used to seeing. But this dogleg here, I believe, is 12% to first place. So this is a flatter payout structure for the top 5, top 10. If we find the albatross, so that would also be another single entry that you can enter for tomorrow. This one is 10% to first place. So these are the kind of payout structures that we prefer for Showdown because they're flatter for that top 5, top 10, and you're not entering against 7 to 10,000 other people. And the other part too is you get protected from those 150 max sharks that are going to get 150 different combinations to enter against you that, for a lot of hobbyists out there, they maybe put like 5 lineups into the big $25 GPP, or maybe they throw like 20 lineups into the big $5. That sounds all innocent, everything like that. Seems like it's not that big a deal, but it is in the end of things. When they have 7 times more lineups to work with, when they have 30 times more lineups to work with, if you only have 5 in that big $25 GPP, it's going to be really tough to beat them. And heck, even if you have the 150 lineups, it's going to be tough to beat 7,000 or 10,000 other entries and get into that top 5 where all the cash is. So that's why I always say for people that are watching this, maybe a little bit newer to DFS, is not to enter those sort of contests. It's to go to some of those single entries, the stuff that's a little bit lower stakes. And they have stuff that's even lower stakes than what we've gone through so far. Like they have $5 single entries. They have $1 single entries that you can enter. They even have like the 10-cent 20 max that you can enter, where it's only $2 total to get 20 lineups. Enter contests that you can max enter. So for a lot of you that maybe aren't 150 maxing on a showdown slate, that's a lot of lineups to enter for a single round of golf. I get it. Then consider going to the 20 maxes instead, because then you don't have to have an optimizer. You don't have to invest into a whole 150 lineups for a single slate, and you can cater it towards what is the best for your process. So always be line shopping, always be trying to find the best contest available. Personally, I think this Drive the Green is going to make a lot of sense for me. I'll probably 150 max this one because it's only an 8th to first place. So it's a 40K prize pool, 5,000 to first. That's one of the better GPP payout structures that we're going to find. This big sand trap, for example, this is a 3rd to first place, right? It's absolute crap and we're trying to find a sustainable payout structure, because the rest of the top 5, top 10 is just such a step below first place that something like that drive the green that isn't as top heavy is where you're going to see me playing my money for a round like tomorrow. So that's the contest selection. And then now that we have an idea of the contests that you're going to be entering, is you want to cater that to the contest that you're entering now, right? You're going to cater your line of construction to try and take down that specific kind of build. So let's start it off with the big GPP. So if we're entering that $5 or $25, I think you want 2 to 3 pivots in every single lineup. So it doesn't have to be up top. You can still take a piece of chalk if you want to. So for example, Colin Morikawa, he's going to get some ownership for tomorrow, but I think it kind of makes sense with his shots gains profile, how he sets up for the golf course, and the price tag at only $9,900. But for our second man in, I am going to force our hand a little bit with the ownership and take a Sepp Straka, who's only $9,100. So he's going to give us a little bit of differentiation because of his terrible round today. And we still have some work to do with the ownership, though, so we can't stop there. Let's throw in a Ben Griffin with his incredible shots gained metrics. He's not going to get us different to the field, though. As I already told you, he'll probably be at least 15% owned with how good he looks on paper. But now with our last 3 spots, this is where we really want to be careful about it. So like you really might want to play a Sungjae Im, because $7,800 is way too cheap for Sungjae Im. And I totally agree with that. But I would prefer a Tony Finau, and this is again for the big $25 or $5 GPP. I'd prefer your Tony Finau's of the world, because he's going to be way, way lower owned than a Sungjae Im. And he still has some decent course history around here, some sneaky good course history around a TPC River Highlands. And on paper, like if you just look at their projections on my Patreon sheet for tomorrow, he still grades out particularly well. So let's throw him in there at $7,900. We're still left around $7,200 for our last few spots. Let's throw in a JT Poston as another pivot, because he'll be probably 5, maybe even sub 5% owned because of how he started this week. And we know that he's maybe due for some short game regression. So we have pivot there, pivot on GT Poston, pivot with Straka towards the top. So even though we have Morikawa, who's got some ownership, Ben Griffin, who's got some ownership, and even for your last man in, let's say that you took the chalkiest player you possibly could, which would probably be a Jaeger, and he's honestly not that chalky, so you'd be totally fine if you use Steven Jaeger as your last man in. But because we made those pivots in a Finau, a Poston, Straka, even if there was a guy down here who was like 15% owned at this kind of price tag. So like, I guess Wyndham Clark, he's getting close to over the 10% mark with the projected ownership. Even if you took Clark as your last player here, you'd get away with it, because we were very intentional about where we got that differentiation. So in those large field GPPs, that's how I like to build my lineups. Now, if this is for a single entry, so for something where maybe you were only entering against a couple hundred other entries, maybe you aren't as bold in taking a Sepp Straka. So like maybe this is where you throw in a Fleetwood instead, when the shots gained metrics are a little bit cleaner on. In the 7K range, you still want to find guys to get a little bit of differentiation with. So like maybe rather than a Finau, you take Berger, who played a little bit better today, who's maybe a little bit quote unquote safer. And we'll throw that in quotes, because like, no golfer is safe on Showdown. We'll throw in Bud Cauley too, who he had an okay day, but he's still going to give us a little bit of differentiation in that single entry build. Just like the other case here, pretty much no matter who you take as your last man in. So even if it was a Grazerman who's a little bit chalkier than some of the other guys around them, you get away with it here, because this is a single entry. We don't have to be nearly as creative with our ownership. We're really doing all of that work with a Berger and a Cauley. In those two players, I don't think either one is going to be sub 5% owned. So that's the kind of different thought process that you have in some of the smaller contests as opposed to some of the bigger contests. And that's easy to imagine why. When you only have to beat 200 people, you don't have to be as wild about what you do, because you don't have to be perfect to beat 200 other people. But when you're playing against 10,000 other entries, you have to be damn near perfect to take it down. And also, the other thing you want to think about is that when you get a slate right and you end up getting a player pool of guys who go off and you have like the top 6 players included, is you don't want to be sharing them with the entire field. Let's say that you have a player pool and it's all chalk, all the guys at the top end of the board, and you happen to get the 6 guys that all go off towards the top. Well, even if that's the case and you're entering in that 10,000 entry contest, well, then you're entering against thousands of other entries that also only played guys towards the top end of the board. So not only do you want to make sure you're not duplicating yourself with other people, that's a big part about differentiation, making sure that we're not going to be splitting first place if you happen to win first with that sort of combination, but also making sure that when your players hit, that you can actually take advantage of that in these large field GPPs. So that's the contest selection segment. That's also the lineup construction and putting it all together. And that's all we've got for round number 2, guys. So best of luck out there with all the exposure that you guys are getting to. We'll be doing the prop and betting live stream on my YouTube channel. That is going to be at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time on the GS Luke DFS YouTube. On there, going through all the stat averages from round number 1, a weather report for Friday, as well as all the pin locations and props on sites like Underdog and Prize Picks. And we're also going to go through some sportsbook stuff like matchups on sites like DraftKings, FanDuel, and Hard Rock Bet to get you guys ready for round 2 as well. So if you don't just bet on the stuff here on fantasy like DraftKings and whatnot, and you also are a player on some of the pick'em sites that we've already mentioned, make sure to check out that live stream in about 35 minutes on my YouTube channel. But other than that, that's all I've got for the round 2 live stream. I hope to see a lot of your logos and names towards the top end of the board. Rounds 3 and 4, we're going to be doing the same exact thing. So make sure you smash that like button. Also subscribe to the YouTube channel over here so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. For Saturday, Sunday, we'll be getting you ready for all the fantasy slates as well as for all the props on rounds 3 and 4 as well. So make sure you're subscribed so you guys don't miss any of that when it drops. I'll see if there's any last second questions we need to go through. And then after we do that, get over to the prop live stream. And see, yeah, Clanton is going off by himself. And he said in that single entry, you have to beat the LSU Nick guy. Yeah, I got to watch out for Nick. He's a sharp out there for sure. But it's all I've got, guys. I'll catch you guys for the live stream in a half an hour and for all the content throughout the rest of the weekend.